Cold was not an inconvenience for the Viking world. It was a constant defining force that shaped how people built, lived and survived. In Scandinavia and the North Atlantic colonies, warmth was engineered into daily life through design, materials and discipline rather than technology. These were not crude shelters thrown together to endure winter. They were carefully optimized systems, refined over centuries, that allowed families to live through brutal cold with consistency and, well, relative comfort. Understanding how Vikings achieved this gives us practical lessons that still apply today, especially for anyone serious about off-grid living, historical reconstruction, or cold weather survival. Viking longhouses were engineered to trap heat and eliminate wasted space. At the heart of Viking domestic architecture was, well, the longhouse, and its design was fundamentally about heat retention. Longhouses were, low and elongated structures with minimal interior volume compared to the floor space. Ceilings were kept deliberately low, so that heat from fires and bodies really had nowhere to rise and dissipate. The walls were thick, often exceeding a metre, and built from turf, sod, stone or timber packed with earth. These walls acted as thermal mass, absorbing heat during the day and then slowly releasing it at night. Applying this today is honestly quite straightforward. If you're designing an off-grid cabin or, say, an emergency shelter in cold climates, reducing ceiling height and increasing wall mass can dramatically improve heat efficiency. Fire placement inside the home was strategic rather than decorative. The hearth was not a centerpiece for comfort alone. It was placed centrally along the long axis of the house, so heat radiated evenly to sleeping platforms on both sides. Smoke was allowed to filter upward and out through roof vents rather than chimneys, which served a secondary purpose by curing roof timbers and discouraging insects. The smoke layer also created an insulating buffer beneath the roof, trapping warmth below. This teaches a crucial survival lesson. A fire does not need to be large to be effective, it needs to be placed correctly. In a modern survival shelter, positioning a heat source centrally, combined with controlled ventilation rather than aggressive exhaust, preserves warmth. The Viking approach reminds us that losing heat through overventilation is as dangerous as inadequate heating. Sleeping arrangements were designed as thermal systems, not furniture. Vikings did not sleep scattered throughout a room. Sleeping platforms were raised wooden benches built into the walls, often shared by multiple people. These platforms were layered with animal skins, wool blankets and straw mattresses, creating insulation from both the cold floor and surrounding air. Body heat from multiple occupants compounded the effect, warming the enclosed space rapidly. Applied today, this reinforces the value of communal sleeping in cold conditions. Whether in a winter survival scenario or a minimalist cabin, sleeping off the ground, sharing body heat, and using layered natural materials dramatically reduces energy expenditure. One well-insulated sleeping platform can actually outperform modern sleeping bags if it's designed correctly. Roof construction was absolutely critical to keeping heat inside and the weather out. Viking roofs were, well, steep and heavily layered. Timber frames were covered with birch bark for waterproofing, then topped with thick sod. The sod added weight, compressing the structure and sealing gaps, while also acting as insulation. Snow accumulating on top only increased insulation rather than posing a threat. This is a direct lesson for cold weather construction. A heavy layered roof that welcomes snow rather than sheds, it can improve thermal performance. Entrances were deliberately inconvenient to reduce heat loss. Doors were small, low, and often offset rather than centered. Many longhouses included short entrance tunnels or windbreaks that, force cold air to slow down before reaching the interior. Daily habits reinforced the structure's ability to stay warm. Warmth was not left to architecture alone. Vikings wore layered wool clothing indoors, kept animals close to living spaces when possible, and, limited unnecessary movement in winter months. Activities were centralized near the hearth, concentrating heat where it mattered most. The materials Vikings used were chosen for performance, not convenience. Wool, fur, wood, earth and stone were selected because they worked in cold environments. Viking homes were not warm by accident. They were the result of accumulated knowledge, tested through generations of winter survival. Every choice reduced heat loss, conserved energy, and increased longevity. These principles remain valid whether you are building an off-grid cabin, preparing for winter emergencies, or studying how pre-industrial societies mastered hostile environments. If this deep dive into Viking survival engineering added value to your understanding of history and practical living, make sure to subscribe to Warpaths of Europe, share this guide with fellow historians and survival enthusiasts, and stay tuned for more grounded, research-driven content that treats the past as a source of real-world knowledge rather than myth.